Alright, I know what you're thinking. I like beer, and I like secession, so I need a show that combines both of them. Well, may I interest you in the new Netflix series House of Guinness, then? You see, from the moment House of Guinness begins, you're plunged into a world where family, power, inheritance, politics, and brewing all collide, and it's clear this is more drama than actual documentary. But the series bills itself as inspired by true stories. And I'm gonna explain why that phrase is doing a little bit of heavy work. You see, behind these sumptuous costumes, smoky rooms, whispered betrayals, and grand estates, there lies a messy reality where the writers have reshaped facts, invented characters, compressed some timelines, and even dramatized events for some emotional impact. But hey, what show hasn't, right? So how much of what you see is real history, and how much is Netflix taking creative license? Let's walk through it. First, the core premise. Sir Benjamin Lee Guinness died in 1868, leaving behind a brewing empire and 4 children, Arthur, Edward, Anne, and Benjamin Jr., who now must grapple with his legacy both in business and in blood. And that much is true. Benjamin Guinness, grandson of Arthur Guinness, was indeed a major brewer in 19th century Ireland, wealthy, influential, and a man whose death would naturally leave a succession question. The show's right to start in that position. Now, the real Benjamin funded public works, notably restoration of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and he left a pretty complex legacy, but right away the show amplifies and dramatizes what was likely more orderly, or at least less explosively chaotic in the real world. One of the biggest changes revolves around the will and inheritance. In the series, Arthur and Edward are the only ones given control of the brewery, while Anne and Benjamin Jr. are marginalized and left with nothing. So naturally, there's intense anger and resentment. But in reality, the picture is a lot more nuanced. There's no solid historical evidence that Anne or Benjamin were totally cut out or disinherited. In truth, Benjamin Sr. did stipulate that if his sons withdrew from the enterprise, their capital claims should be limited, but that's not the same as casting off children entirely. The writers tighten the wound for drama, turning sibling tensions into a kind of war over birthright, and that simplification makes the plot sharper. One fight, one villain, sibling rivalry, but it's a departure from how inheritance operated within the actual Guinness family. The series also takes liberties with the funeral procession and public unrest. See, in the opening scenes, you see protesters, bottles flying, burning things, and riots all around Guinness's funeral. And that makes for cinematic power, sure, but historians say there's no record of violent protests against Benjamin's passing. The show amplifies nationalist sentiment and public anger as a narrative motif to then raise the stakes and tie the family's conflict directly into the wider Irish political nature of the era. Speaking of politics, the show leans heavily into the tension between unionism, Irish nationalism, and religious divides. That tension's very real. The Guinness family was part of the Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy. That's the class that maintained power under British dominion in Ireland, even as Catholic emancipation and nationalistic agitation ended up reshaping public life as people knew it. So, setting the family amid protests and secret societies and blackmail and espionage, it's theatrically appropriate, but the show invests in specific plots and characters that are often fictional or at least very much exaggerated. For example, characters like Patrick and Ellen Cochrane in the show who manipulate, blackmail, and threaten the family are invented, or fictional devices meant to dramatize political pressure in a manageable framework. The writers use them to personify the nationalist threat rather than actually rely on faceless mobs. Anne Guinness's presence and arc is another blend of fact and fiction. In the show, Anne is depicted as sick and frail, emotionally vulnerable, even sidelined at times, but possessing moral insight into the actual suffering of the poor. Her real philanthropic efforts included founding a nursing home and engaging in charitable works, though she was never the dramatic martyr figure the show actually implies her to have been. The show's choice to amplify her illness and make it a narrative driver is classic dramatic move, right? We've seen it in tons of shows, using fragility to evoke sympathy or tension. Her empathy is real, but the degree to which the show turns that into powerful confrontations or crisis is probably heightened beyond the actual documentary record. Edward Guinness, the younger brother, is shown as ambitious and daring, entrepreneurial. He's keen to expand the brewery and his social standing, and that tracks with history. Edward Cecil Guinness did eventually float parts of the company to the London market, and he invested heavily in property and philanthropy. The series shows him pushing for expansion, more modern techniques, and of course trying to outshine Arthur, but it also fudges timelines and compresses the growth trajectory in the process. The show sometimes portrays Edward as nearly ruthless in his ambition, and in real life his motivations are somewhat mixed, some philanthropic, some strategic, and probably political as well. The dramatic contrast with Arthur is also heightened. Arthur Guinness is portrayed as charismatic but conflicted, and he carries burdens of guilt and expectation. But in real life, Arthur Edward Guinness eventually did buy out portions of Edward's stake in the brewery and held great influence. He also faced controversies. He was implicated in election irregularities when running for parliament. And the show leans hard into the idea that Arthur's personally flawed or morally compromised, turning rumors and fragmentary evidence into full-blown scandals. That's partly invented or extrapolated from some small historical hints that we have, but woven into the drama to humanize him and heighten stakes. The invented character Sean Rafferty is perhaps the largest single fictional insertion here. In House of Guinness, Rafferty is a foreman in the brewery and a fixer. He's a man of secrets, power, and access who helps carry out the darker tasks and serves as the family's interface with labor and rebellion and unwanted threats. It sounds great, right? He's Catholic in the show, adding religious tension and intimately involved with some of these siblings' relationships, and he's, in reality though, a narrative device, a loyal enforcer, insider, outsider, someone who can open locked doors for the plot and tie together conflicting arcs. Another change is how the show handles time. For dramatic effect, events are compressed and decades of brewing growth and political change are condensed into months or years. Real-life expansion of Guinness export, the growth of international markets, the establishment of pensions and housing charity work by Edward, the mergers, the acquisitions, all of these happened over extended periods of time. The show often telescopes them just to heighten the urgency. You may see characters making decisions and executing projects overnight that in reality actually took years. That kind of compression is common in historical dramas. This is not something new to any of us. It's very much a deliberate choice to preserve pacing and tension, even if it sacrifices some authenticity in the process. The show also leans into secret plots, conspiracies, murders, blackmail, and betrayals, all of which are dramatically very satisfying, but historians say many of these are fabrications or at least very much fictional exaggerations. For instance, the show may portray an assassination attempt or something extremely dark happening, and while Benjamin Guinness did receive death threats, and there was political tension at the time, there's no record he was subject to elaborate assassination plots tied to family intrigue as dramatized in the series. And likewise, scenes of secret meetings and conspiratorial dealings are plotted behind closed doors. Those are mostly invented, or at least amplified from rumor rather than actual correspondence. Another area altered for dramatic effect is how the show portrays the Guinness Company's relationship to their workers. And this is important here. In the show, Edward pushes for pensions and worker housing and benefits and holidays and a more benevolent employer image, often against some internal resistance. But in reality, Guinness was relatively progressive for its time, offering some worker benefits and focusing on better conditions, investing in housing projects and philanthropy. But the show sometimes frames these reforms as sudden, controversial moves, and there's some pushback from conservative forces within the family or management that may be amplified. The real history is a little less antagonistic and more incremental. The show exaggerates internal conflict to underscore some of the themes of class, power, and modernization, all very central to that time period, for the record. One more compression is the portrayal of Anne's illness and personal life. Now, in the show, her condition and her romantic entanglements are central to her character arc, and the show sometimes suggests some affairs and blackmail. But while she did suffer ill health and her philanthropic leanings are pretty accurate, the particular flirtations and scandals and emotional turmoil are largely speculative. The series uses those elements to dramatize her marginalization in a male-dominated inheritance war and to give her vulnerability narrative weight. Those choices make her more than a peripheral figure, but they drift from verifiable record into more of imaginative territory. You've heard me use the word dramatize a lot, and that's because a lot of this show is dramatic for the sake of being dramatic. That doesn't mean it's not good, of course, because the show does nod to the Guinness family's expansion into the US and their growing international footprint and all the strategic export that went behind that. And the series sometimes credits Edward or Arthur with pioneering aspects of the US market or linking their brand overseas in dramatic fashion, but in reality, Guinness beer had already been exported to the US, and some other markets also had it during this time frame. The show compresses or reassigns credit to characters to heighten their ambition and make export efforts feel like major personal initiatives and hurdles rather than just gradual business evolution. Still, the show does get many broad strokes right. The Guinness family was wealthy, they were powerful, they were influential, and alive to public concern. Their Protestant identity, their role in Irish civic life, their tension with Irish nationalism, philanthropy, and the challenges of industrial growth all resonate with recorded history from that period of time. The character arcs of Arthur, Edward, and Anne in broad aspect echo their documented lives, even if individual scenes are invented. So where Netflix changes things is in turning intermittent facts into fixed and extended conflicts, breeding conspiracies out of possibility and amplifying every internal family friction to severe melodrama. That's not unusual for a show of this kind. It leans into what's based on truth and uses that as more of a launching pad for fiction. Some in the Guinness family have bristled at the depiction. They argue the portrayal of certain ancestors as foolish and callous or disconnected from their real reputations, especially when the series frames their charity or public works as driven by self-interest or guilt, and that's understandable. One descendant expressed fury that the show leaned too heavily into modern cliches about rich families, emotional coldness and betrayal and power games. They say the real family was more measured and less sensational than the series suggests. Obviously, though, the show trades nuance for drama because viewers want confrontation, not quiet historical accounts. So that's what's true and what Netflix changed in House of Guinness. You get real people, real rivalries, sincere institutions, but filtered and twisted, stretched, and sharpened for much more dramatic effect. What do you think of the show, though? Let us know in the comments below.